Hello, this is Angelica Yingst, and you're listening to Centered, grounded conversations about the metaphysical.
Happy New Year, it's Angelica, or Angie if you will, your friendly neighborhood bruja, omen translator, and the person who spends way too much time staring at tarot cards. So you don't have to. So let's grab some tea. I've brought some tarot cards, a couple of myths, probably too many metaphors, so let's talk about 2026. My jam is cycles. The cycle of the year, lunar cycles, cycles of our life, our female cycles, our male cycles, our cycles, they kind of help us get the wind at our back if we're aligned with them. I actually created a whole oracle card deck called Cycles. I have a book. I have a class. It's my thing. So let's imagine the wheel turning. We don't even have to imagine it. We see it, right? We recently just turned from autumn to winter. It's very wintry today in Pennsylvania, but the wheel is turning. It's not turning politely, not slowly. It's just turning. The way seasons turn, the way tides turn. Time keeps doing its thing, what time does, whether we've made peace with that or not. So for 2026, Tarot's giving us two archetypes to work with, and one of them is the wheel. It is the wheel turning, the wheel of fortune. That's a 10, and the magician is the other archetype, which is a 1. Before we go any further, I'm just going to explain this isn't prophecy. These aren't predictions. They're symbolic lens. They're an archetype to work with. We myth, language for change, they give us foundations to think about how to process, the changes that we go through. So we just came out of a hermit year, which was a 9 year, and we're moving into a 10 year. So, the Wheel of Fortune is basically our reminder of life being cyclical. Sometimes we rise, sometimes we descend, sometimes we hover sideways, not knowing which way is up. But the wheel asks us, can I stay present even when I'm not in control? And right next to that, we see the magician who says basically, yes, you can stay present. The magician doesn't control the wheel, but they work with what is on the table in front of them. They align with intention, body, will, voice, action, and ask, what can I do wisely and creatively with what's here? And okay, so I'm going to kind of backtrack and just say, this is how we get the archetypes and why we do it. So we use numerology, and it's, some people are like, well, that's just random. Yeah, so we can make meaning out of random things. We do all the time, We have for years. That's what omens are, A bird falls dead in front of you in the morning. Is that an omen or is it just random? Well, you get to make the meaning out of it. If you rise from it, it's medicine for you. And that's why I think numerology can be very important, because if we rise to it, it can be important for us. If we just are like, it's 2026, whatever. It's just a number. It's just a random number based on a random point in time that people started doing this, right? Counting years. But for me, I find it helpful, right? So, okay, let's just, before I get through all the disclaimers of my life, 2026, we add 2 plus 0 plus 2 plus 6. All the numbers get added together. So 2 plus 0 is 2, plus 2 is 4, plus 6 is 10. So we have a 10 year. Now generally when we think of the tarot, we have 22 basically major arcana. The Fool is a 0 number. You're never going to get a 0 when you add things together, but we can sometimes use if you get a 22, you can use it as a 0. You can use it as the Fool. Or you can just use 1 through 21. So basically, if your number is below 21, you may keep it that card, right? So 21 is the World. You can keep it there. But you can also break it down. So you could add for the 10, we would add the 1 plus the 0, which gives us a 1 year, okay? And that's how we get around, adding up over 21 and how we get a card anyway. We just keep adding until we break it down to the number that fits into that 1 to 21 number. So you can do this with your own birthday. For example, my birthday is January 4th, 1974. So I'm adding all those numbers together. 1 for my month, that's January, plus 4, right? So that's a 5. That's my day, and my month is a 5. And then the numbers of my birth year, I was born in the 1900s. So 1 plus 9, that's 10, plus 7, that's 17, plus 4, that's 21. So if I add the 21 plus the 5, I get a 26. And when I add 2 and 6 together, I get an 8. So my life path card is the strength card. And, that was not surprising to me when I figured that out. I have wrestled my entire life with the concept of strength. Everyone's like, you're so strong. It's like, I don't want to be strong, I'd rather just have things easy like the rest of us, but then you come to realize oh, everyone has it hard, But anyway, so when I add that up, that's my life path. So that's the kind of what we call in, kind of think of it in tarot or in archetype work is this is kind of the thing you're wrestling with through your whole life. It isn't that oh, I've been given strength, I'm awesome. It's that we wrestle with it. So sometimes it's I'm unable to deal with it. There's a powerlessness. So we deal with both the upright concept of that card and the reverse concept or the challenging concept of that card, right? That's what an archetype is. We don't always have it just being the positive aspects of that card. So it's not surprising when you do this that, sometimes it's going to resonate a lot, and sometimes you're going to be really turned off by what you get, right? And I'll give you an example. So you can figure out what your card of the year is by adding your month and day of birth. So again, I'm a 5, right? That's a 5, and then adding it to 2026, which would be this year right now. 2026 for me is 15, right? So we've got 1 plus 4 plus 2 plus 0 plus 2 plus 6. So we've got the 5 and we've got the 10. Adding them together, I have a 15 year. That means this is the devil year for me. But I can break it down further and do the lovers. Now, every time I work with the devil, I work with the lovers, and so should you, because they go hand in hand. The lovers shows this idyllic basically pre-eating of the apple. But we do see the snake there. We do see the tree of knowledge. We see the clouds behind Archangel Raphael in that card, right? And what is the devil? Maybe that is after we eat the apple. Now I'm making a biblical reference to Adam and Eve, okay? Because on the lovers it shows Adam and Eve. So at any rate, they're meant to be worked together, and we see that numerologically. Sometimes words get caught. So let's go back to the story of 2026. We've got this 10 year, a 1 year, a both year, So 2026 isn't just the Wheel of Fortune or the Magician. It's the wheel turns and the magician responds. So if the wheel reminds us that life will shift, structures will move, cycles will complete, fate still has some teeth and some bite to it. The magician reminds us that we are not powerless, that we can shape meaning inside of the changes and the normal wheel of life, right? We will still participate. We are not victims of fate. Fate does not have to run us over. We can make meaning out of it. So when we look at 2026 through these two archetypes, the Wheel of Fortune and the Magician, we get a deeper picture of the year. Right? The wheel says life is going to move this year. Things will turn. Cycles will complete. That's what 10s are. We kind of think of 9s as being the end of a cycle, and the 10 is the beginning of a new cycle. So it harkens to a cycle having just been completed. So some doors close without or with our permission, and some doors open before we feel entirely ready. So the 10 time is that new beginning of we have gone through this cycle, now we're ready for the bigger thing. What's our 5-year plan? We've gotten through that part. It can feel very humbling, we're standing in the middle of the road and realizing, right, I am not actually running the universe. And then the magician steps in and he says, I am not hopeless. I'm not going to like fall into that negativity. And he stands there between heaven and earth, one hand lifted and one hand grounded, the tools spread out before him. And he says, the wheels turn and you can make things happen, right? He doesn't bargain with fate. He doesn't stop the wheel. He doesn't bypass what's happening. He listens. He works with what has arrived. He asks, how do I align myself with the deeper intelligence at work? What is my part? I really like looking at the magician as one aligned with divine timing. He goes with the wind at his back, right? He reads the signs, the tea leaves. So together the cards are kind of like, you can't necessarily control the turning of the wheel, but you can choose how you meet it. You get to decide where you place your attention. You get to decide what story you tell. You get to decide how to use your gifts, your voice, your tools, your magic inside whatever life is bringing. This isn't the kind of magic this is, I get everything I want if I visualize hard enough. We can think of that as baby magic, as ego magic. That's like the like magic of like, let's I'm going to change it just by thinking positively, And not that I do think that positive thinking is helpful. But in my opinion, soul magic, deep magic, is that I stay present, I collaborate with spirit, I do my part fully, and then I let the rest belong to God, to the mystery, to the higher power, to the universe, to the turning of the wheel. It's really like living the serenity prayer, right? God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference, right? So we kind of have to understand, like, okay, I can't change the turning of the wheel, but I can change how I respond to it. I can change what I can change, right? So let's talk about the Wheel of Fortune. I want to go more in depth because I do think that understanding the symbolism of the Wheel of Fortune is important to understand the concept, the archetype that we're working with. And the Wheel of Fortune card has a historic concept called the Rota Fortunae. And in ancient belief systems from Babylon to ancient Greece, the concept of fate was often imagined as this large cosmic wheel known as the Rota Fortunae. So countless historical illustrations of the wheel exist from the ancient period up through the Middle Ages. And typically these illustrations feature well-known kings or emperors or political figures or even clergy, and they're all drawn around the wheel. The implication is that fate alone raises men up and fate casts them down. So the idea was, the artwork was really showing that the wheel was making this whole political machination work. So when we see the artwork of the Wheel of Fortune tarot card, it's a direct reference to this common historic pictorializing of fate. So the word tarot, T-R-O, T-A-R-O, T-A-R-O, and rota, R-O-T-A, in the center of the wheel cleverly hints at both tarot and Rota Fortunae. Okay? So it has that double entendre thing. The Wheel of Fortune, it's not sexual, right? But this is double entendre. Anyway, double meaning. The Wheel of Fortune marks a point of completion in some way. The wheel showing up as we end a journey through the archetypes of childhood into adulthood. Okay? So that's the thing. When we look at the major arcana of the tarot, we're looking at really this is the fool's journey, and the fool is the divine child. Rachel Pollack, she's one of the most prominent writers on tarot. She organized the cards in this way in 78 Degrees of Wisdom, which is basically her seminal work. And it can be I love that book. I think it's very helpful to group them this way. Basically, she calls the cards 1 through 7 the consciousness. This is when This is the childhood. We go through the mother, the father, the teachers, the lover, we're going through all the things and kind of dealing with the outer concerns of life, growing up, friends, independence, those kind of things. Then she calls the cards 8 through 14 the unconscious. This is the inner search for identity. And so you're looking at self-knowledge and transformation, death, rebirth, those kind of things that we weigh as we get older and we say, like, what is this life thing I'm all about? We start dealing with the inner concerns, right? And then the cards 15 through 21, which, have pretty challenging cards. We're talking about the devil starts it off, then tower. Then we have the sun, the moon, the stars. But, she calls that the super consciousness. And that's really the development of spiritual awareness. We're going to have the bigger challenges in those times because these are things beyond us. This is a search for the divine. So when we think about the devil coming up, we're thinking about like all those little obsessions that take us away from, our own connection with God. So I really like that way of thinking about it because it's helpful. So when we think of, the 10, we're kind of moving into like the 8, the 9, the 10 cards are strength, the hermit, the wheel of fortune. We're moving from adulthood into that search for identity. Who are we? What is the meaning of our life? So we're talking about that exploration of, the unconscious, right? The trials and tribulations of facing shadow with cards, with these archetypes. So the wheel really deals with time, all kinds of time, moral time, mortal time, eternal time. In some ways, the wheel foreshadows the work we do later on in judgment. I mean, that's where God calls the dead to transcend time and live in timelessness and higher truth. So there are many images on the Wheel of Fortune, and I think some tarot students get overwhelmed by the amount of stuff on there. But I think if you want to, you could look at the last card as well, which is we have the wheel and the world. If you look at them together, we're really seeing very similar images. The many images on the Wheel of Fortune have Egyptian gods. So we see the jackal-headed god Anubis, who leads the dead to the halls of justice. Okay, the snake, which represents the biblical tempter. It also could be the Egyptian god Set, who murdered Osiris. Incidentally, Anubis with Isis restores Osiris to life. Then we see the 4 letters intermixing, the Hebrew and Roman letters, spell the tetragrammaton in Hebrew. So that's the Yod, the He, the Vav, and the He. That's the all-powerful name of God. Then the Roman letters spell Rota, they spell tarot, they spell Orat, they spell Torah, they spell Atar. And Rachel Pollack again notes that the wheel, Latin Rota, the tarot, T-A-R-O, also you could put the extra T on there. It speaks in Latin, which is Orat. The law in Hebrew is Torah. Love is Ator or Hathor from the Egyptian goddess. So we also see the alchemical symbols for salt, water, sulfur, and mercury. Those alchemical symbols promise us complete transformation and transmutation if we seek it. So on the wheel, we see the hints also of the 4 archangels: Archangel Michael, Archangel Raphael, Archangel Uriel, and Gabriel. And we also see the 4 fixed signs of the zodiac. The Taurus, earth, Leo is fire, this is Scorpio is water, and Aquarius is air. It also represents the 4 evangelists: Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John. They hold the directions, basically. So in the wheel, they're only sketches or hints of the knowledge they possess. They're not fully formed. Whereas if you put the world next to it, you see them in color. That's where we know we've now got all the knowledge they possess, because it's not just a sketch. We're already filled in, right? But because we're only halfway through the major arcana, they're just sketches, right? They're solid in the world. So the Wheel of Fortune urges us to take control of our destiny and to allow ourselves to examine the paths in front of you and choose. Now, we know we can't change all of our fate and destiny. We're born the way we're born, right? So we have to work with what is given for us. And the wheel is always turning, and life is always in a state of constant change. The only thing that doesn't change is change. And the recognition of impermanence is an important part of our existential reality. And it helps us deal with our own suffering. So we attach to the impermanent. We attach to our home. We attach to our lover. We attach to even our animals and our children, creating a sense that they're immortal because of the depth of our attachment. And if being attached causes our suffering, then we must have that constant understanding and recognition that everything dies, including us, right? It sounds so morbid and sad and all those things, but we have to come to that place when we deal with the Wheel of Fortune, because that's part of the change of the wheel. It moves, it changes. So the wheel is one of those cards that's kind of beyond us. It talks of time, and it is that foreshadowing of the work that we're going to do in judgment and the world, where God calls the dead to transcend time, right? Like I said earlier. Now, one thing to note here is that, and I love this, and this isn't like probably in any tarot book or anything, but one thing I love about working with like the goddesses and understanding the work that they bring forth is I've worked with Kali, in some years she's the main deity that I'm working with, and Kali, is the goddess of what they call destruction. But she's actually the goddess of time. And that's the thing. She devours everything and everything gets reborn again, So we kind of see this idea that we find ourselves at these spiritual crossroads in Wheel of Fortune years. We wrestle with fate. We wrestle with the idea that everything is tied to everything else. We find ourselves, be ending one cycle and beginning another. And when we see ourselves at this spiritual crossroads, we kind of go like, okay, I know I've healed some wounds and some wounds have not healed. Where can I go next, And I'm at this place. And I think thinking of it as a crossroads can be very helpful. Crossroads are very important in witchiness. We think of it like being at these crossroads, like we often bury things at crossroads, But when we're at these places, we often will like kind of wonder like which path is forward, which path is going to get me to my ultimate goal. And I think one of the important parts to remember is they're both going to get you there. It's just a matter of how hard is one path versus the other, and which do you need and want, Like, when I started recovery, and I call my sponsor every day. That's what she asked me to call her every day to check in and basically remind myself that I'm an alcoholic and I need help. And she'd be like, "How you feeling today?" And be like, "I feel terrible." And she would say, "This too shall pass, Ange." And another day I'd call and she's like, "How you feeling?" I'm like, "I'm great. I'm on a pink cloud. I feel awesome." She's like, "This too shall pass, Ange." Everything will pass. This cycle asks us to be present with what is happening to us right now, to cherish the present. And if you're someone who likes control and stability, then the Wheel of Fortune may come as like an unwanted guest. But the Wheel of Fortune can represent the way fate, karma, luck, all those things come together and really move us forward. Some call this the cycle of death and rebirth, as the wheel. And there's a strong connection here with karma. And we see that in the next card, which is justice, that kind of interesting part. I mean, I think it's important to put these cards in context of the cycle that was created through the 22 major arcana cards. If we're like buoyed between the Hermit and Justice, I've been alone to learn the truth of who I am and now I'm going to go out into the world and help people, or I'm going to go and apply this to my life. And then we get the Wheel of Fortune, and we get this like things are turning and life just keeps happening. We have removed ourselves from that in the Hermit. We have been removed from the cycle, right? Because we have isolated ourselves, or sought solitude, or however you want to say it. Now in these Wheel of Fortune years, we move back in. And it kind of reminds me of that old story about the farmer whose horse ran away, and all the townspeople are like, oh, such bad luck. He says, good luck, bad luck, who knows? And then the horse comes back with 2 more wild horses. And all the townspeople are like, oh, that's such good luck. And he's like, good luck, bad luck, who knows? And then the son, who's trying to tame the wild horses, is thrown to the ground, breaks his leg. And everybody's like, oh, what terrible luck. He's like, good luck, bad luck, who knows? Then the army comes, and his son was not conscripted to service because he has a broken leg. And everybody's like, oh, it's such good luck. He's like, good luck, bad luck, who knows? And it just reminds us we're only seeing part of the story of our life, and how one seemingly good luck situation might end up having a hard situation at the end, which turns then into a positive one. And we can't take one thing out and have it still end up the same, right? We have to go through every single thing. So Wheel of Fortune years are not years to be like quick to judgment. You might be in, a cycle that's like, oh, I'm just in such bad luck. It's like, no, this is the changing of the way life just changes. So you're in this life thing for the long haul. So there's no need to make up your mind just yet if this is good luck and bad luck. And when we think of the wheel and we think of, okay, I'm approaching life, taking life on life's terms, I'm going to be present. We come in then with the Magician. This is the, how do we do this? So many tarot writers will call the Magician the archetypal achiever. And certainly I can see that aspect of the Magician clearly. Magicians are often used as another term for the alchemist. But one thing we do know is he's a hard worker. He's dedicated his life to making a complicated technical process appear easy. Magicians spend their whole life studying magic, and this is part of his gift and his mastery. Now we think of magic as being like, oh, I add a little, Eye of Newt and this and that. But, we see magic in everyday life all the time, right? Someone who can bake beautifully, they have a kind of magic to it. It tastes good. It takes you to another place. So his gift and his, what he brings to the table is mastery. And we think of the Magician in modern parlance as this guy with a top hat and a cape, and his entire job is to make it look like he's not doing anything, that that suddenly a coin appears out of thin air, or spirits have told him what your card is, but what he has done is studied his entire life to make it look like he's not really doing anything. And I often think of this famous Picasso story where Picasso's in a restaurant and a man approaches him and asks him for a sketch on a napkin, and he draws something quickly and says, $5,000, por favor. And the man's aghast, and it's like, that only took you 30 seconds. And Picasso says, no, that sketch took me 50 years. And so the Magician can really reply, it took me a lifetime to learn all I've learned, bringing it together beautifully, easily for this one thing. Is that not worth more than I've given myself credit for? So the Magician knows his worth. He knows how hard he's worked. Now, does he give things away for free? Probably. The Magician enjoys his craft, right? But the Magician in his most honorable aspects wants no credit for the magic he is performing. He's just bringing it all together, all of his unique talents and gifts for this moment. So he stands tall and ready, honoring the medicine, the elements all laid out in front of him. And that's something you see on the card. There's a table, and then he has, the pentacle, the sword, the cup, and the wand. So we know he has all those things. So he has lots of growth around him. He has the infinity symbol, or the lemniscate, over his head, meaning he has infinite knowledge. Okay. Then he has the Ouroboros as a belt around his waist, which is also the symbol of a cycle. Okay? The symbol of the wheel. The snake eating its own tail, right? So he doesn't have these things on because he's like, well, he's symbolizing the abundance he can call forth, the mastery that he has had, the knowledge, the fruits of his years of labor. And so the magician really demands that you see yourself as deserving, worthy, important, creative, that you also have studied various things. Like, I think of the magician a lot in what I do because, I studied tarot, I studied Reiki, I studied crystal healing, then I went to, I started a shamanic journey and animal medicine, and then I got my earth medicine practitioner, and then I became a recovery coach, and then I became, I have like all these different things, but like somehow they've woven together in this one path, And so when I think about everything I've ever wanted to do in my life, from being an architect when I was a kid, to an artist, to a writer, to a doctor, I can see them all as part of the same, like I've brought them all together. And there's no one in the world who has my exact set of experiences and knowledge, just like there's no one in the world that has your exact same set of knowledge and experience. So when you're in work, you're not just bringing like all the studies that you have had, all the things that got you a degree that could get you that job. You're also bringing all your experiences in life, right? All the traumas you've gone through, all the experiences with all the people that you've had. You're bringing an emotional intelligence. You're bringing an intelligence, right? So the magician stands in a very specific position. He's holding 2 wands, which look like selenite wands to this crystal healer, but that's beside the point. He is embodying the Hermetic principle. As above, so below. And that's the mantra of the ancient alchemist and the modern witch, incidentally. As above, so below is a paraphrase of the second verse of the Emerald Tablet, a short Hermetic text found in an Arabic source from the late 8th or early 9th century. The actual quote is, "That which is above is like to that which is below, and that which is below is like to that which is above." And philosophers and historians understood this to talk about how the celestial machinations affect earthly events, like how the sun affects the changes of the season, or the moon affects the tides. And of course it talks about the astrological, how the planets and their placement in the night sky affect our personalities or our daily lives, So some scholars of Greek understand this principle saying, like, basically the phrase talks about how the microcosm or the greater world, I should say the macrocosm, the greater world, universe, structurally mirrors the microcosm, the smaller world or the human body. Later, the occultists, particularly those led by Madame Blavatsky, popularized the phrase "as above, so below" to cover the quote-unquote the truth that there is a harmony, agreement, and correspondence between several planes of manifestation, life, and being. This truth is a truth because all that is included in the universe emanates from the same source, and the same laws, principles, and characteristics apply to each unit or combination of units of activity as each manifests its own phenomenon upon the plane. So the magician's stance is embodying the "as above, so below" principle. It tells us he's a Hermetic figure, that he's an alchemist, that he is the one that heals and manifests and believes he can create something out of nothing, or really find that something that always existed, always exists and has always existed and will always exist. And therefore he is the manifester of the tarot, the one who creates the reality he lives in. He is the powerhouse of will. So when we live in a magician year, there's something far more beautiful than simply doing magic, though maybe you'll come to your magician self. But the magician really transforms our desires from the mundane to the profound. He acts as a bridge between heaven and earth. he can be like the archetype for an energy healer. He can be the archetype for the manifester. He can be the archetype for the one that invites God into conversation or into the process. He can be seen as an archetype of faith. He is most aligned with the cliche that God can move mountains if you bring a shovel. It's like the magician shows up with the shovel. So in many ways, the magician is kind of your higher self, and he's very early. He's the one, so he's right after the fool. He's the first thing that the fool meets. And I think that the magician can represent our higher self. It's our ability to bring our natural, human, sometimes base desires into a larger soul path. Because he's a number one, he stands alone. He doesn't often work in pairs, so he figures this stuff out by himself. And when I am doing readings and I'm when I pull the tarot, I basically tell that person in front of me, no one can do what you do. And usually they're like, yeah, at work, like no one does, like I do all these different roles, So often, you're pulling extraordinary skills together to be able to do what you need. And this is a card that's disciplined, precise, and dedicated. And, it's a wonderful card. It's a really great, powerful card. And, we can look at some of the warnings of the magician, which is arrogance, selfishness, using power in ways that aren't like aligned with your soul path or with divine will. If you have that power, are you using it for good? And that's always the shadow side, because when the magician really believes his own tricks are real, then he thinks he's magic and no one else is. Then he's in an unequal place. But when he is thinking of himself as being, aligned with divine will or humble, he's of service to others, then the magician is it's the best. So when we look at 2026 through both archetypes, we begin to understand this is a deeper invitation. The wheel really reminds us that life moves with or without our permission. The seasons turn, stories unravel, cycles complete whether we're ready or not. So a wheel year will humble us, reminding us we're not the center of the universe, and that much of what happens is part of a far older, far more, far bigger pattern than our single storyline. But the magician steps in and refuses to let that truth become hopelessness or nihilism or something like that. He stands there with the, infinity symbol in his hands, raised and grounded, and says, yes, but you're also a co-creator here. And so the cycle, the wheel kind of spins the circumstances, and the magician chooses how to meet those circumstances. One card speaks to the mystery of timing and destiny and the great web of life, and the other speaks to agency, intention, and alignment with divine will. So together they say you can't control this turning of the wheel, but you can choose how you participate in it. You can meet fate with consciousness. You can work with the elements on your table. You can use what you have, which is everything that you've ever been through. And this isn't like manifestation in an egoic sense, like I get what I want because I'm magic. This is mature magic. This is the magician who has learned to listen for the soul path and to act from there, and to kind of pair with the cycle already happening. Let that cycle be, the wind behind you, helping you move faster. So in a wheel year paired with the magician, we're really learning to trust the movements of life, and also learning to accept and fully step into our gifts, our crafts, our capacity to collaborate with spirit. So we learn to say, the wheel turns, I stay present, I do my part, I let the rest belong to God, And then, there is another layer this year, which I wanted to bring in, which is the Chinese zodiac, because 2026 is the year of the fire horse. And I wanted to be respectful here, because I'm definitely not teaching Chinese astrology, but I'm using fire horse symbolically, honoring its roots and letting it sit in conversation with the other systems I work with. But what the year of the horse really means broadly is that, in the Chinese sexagenary cycle, which is a 60-year cycle, we look at every year blending one of the 12 animals and one of the 5 elements: wood, fire, earth, metal, or water. Okay, so horse years generally symbolize movement, travel, momentum. There's charisma, enthusiasm. There could be restlessness. There's definitely an independence and freedom with horse. Like they're the great sojourner, right? There's a don't fence me in energy. There's quick decisions, sometimes impulsive ones, but there's no stagnation. They really kick against stuck doors. And so when we're looking at a fire year, fire intensifies whatever it touches. It's passionate, courageous, visible. There's heat, temper, drama, creativity that wants to burst into form. There's urgency and combustion. And of course, the great transformer is fire, right? We see that transmutation and that transformation with fire. So fire horse energy is horse energy turned up a couple of notches. It's movement. Where, the last horse year was 2014, and basically it negotiated and learned. It's a little more stable, right? The fire horse is like, move and I'll figure it out as I go, So the archetype here is really the revolutionary, the performer, the wild fire that refused domestication. So historically, fire horses carry a kind of reputation because they're every 60 years, folklore collected around them. And most famously, the last fire horse year was 1966. And in part of East Asia, there was a belief that girls born in the year of the fire horse would grow up too independent, too strong-willed for marriage, bad luck for families. They were bringers of misfortune. And so birth rates dropped, people changed plans, and misogyny did its thing. And from a modern lens, the myth reads like, strong women terrify patriarchal systems. And so, this is less like cosmic truth and more cultural anxiety. But fire horse energy, framed generously, is unruly life force that refuses to shrink, which makes me want to cheer for it, not fear it. So when we think of 2026, we see these gestures towards movement after stagnation. So things that have been stuck want to move, not in neat straight lines, more like the dam cracks and the river reclaims its path, right? We have sovereignty versus control. So the fire horse despises coercion. Systems that over control get challenged, sometimes dramatically. And on a personal level, we wrestle with where we've been domesticated. We also have the consequences of speed. So momentum is very thrilling, but burnout is real. So the fire horse really asks us, where is speed wise and where is it compensating for fear? And the visibility. We want our hidden talents out in the open. Not only does the fire horse want that, but so does the magician. So we have that creative work pushing us towards visibility. So we need that resilience too, because once we're visible, that attracts criticism, and so we need resilience there. So how to kind of work with fire horse, and I should say how to ride the fire horse rather than get dragged by the fire horse. These are like guideposts, not rules, but anchor your body. We obviously need to work with our nervous system. So grounding, sleep, water, walks, all boring things, but important. Choose where to say yes. Not every opportunity needs a yes. And that's one of the things about these years of, the wheel and the magician and the fire horse. There's a lot of creative energy. So you might get a lot of offers to do stuff and a lot of people wanting you to be part of their thing. It's okay to say no where you have to. You have to build rest into your plan because fire horse burns fuel fast. So recovery is part of the medicine that we need. We want truth, not necessarily rudeness, but diplomacy still matters, but self-betrayal costs more in a year of a fire horse. And creative projects want momentum. So we have to treat them like horses. Train, don't cage. So I just want to say that the fire horse year doesn't begin January 1st. It is mid-February this year, so we're not quite there yet, but we're kind of we can feel it ramping up. And I have to say one thing. Systems like this don't dictate fate. They give us language. So Fire Horse can be rebellion or renewal, arrogance or confidence, burnout or breakthrough. And the difference often lives like, are you grounding, humble, and pacing yourself? In 2026, I'm working with the word sovereign. I'm already practicing the medicine that Fire Horse needs, which is boundaries, presence, a sense of self that doesn't audition for approval. So I prefer to reclaim Fire Horse as that life force that refuses to shrink. This is where something lights up for me in my own shamanic tradition, which is, the medicine wheel that I was taught. Horse lives in the south, and the south is the direction of fire. So this is a year of, the Fire Horse. So we're really looking at working with the south on the medicine wheel. And south is creativity and transformation. It's a power that moves. South is where we learn to carry energy without burning ourselves or others. It is noon, it is summer, it is fire, it is creativity, it is action, it's sexuality, it's doing. The horse is the carrier of prayer and the carrier of power and the one that travels between worlds. So when I look at 2026 and I look at the symbolic lens, I don't see doom, I don't see buckle up, chaos is coming. I see a year of power. Can you accept the deep invitation of stepping into your own power and carrying it wisely? Because the wheel turns, the magician responds with skill instead of panic. The Fire Horse says, don't cage me in, but don't ride me recklessly either. And, we're looking at this creative, transformative energy. And it's, how do we ride it instead of getting dragged? Well, here's some invitations. Pace yourself. Choose where your power goes. Let truth move, but bless your words. Ritualize your creativity. And remember, this isn't about perfection. Like, that's like every year, authenticity trumps perfection. So myth doesn't give us rules. Myth gives us companionship. And as we step into this year together, maybe we ask, what wants to move through me? What am I carrying? How can I carry it in a way that honors me and my nervous system and my relationships and the earth beneath me? So again, the wheel turns, the magician chooses, the horse runs. And hopefully we ride it with humility and humor and a deep respect for fire, right? So this year isn't a command, it's a story prompt. So let's see what you write. And I just want to say, check out my website or my Instagram or my Facebook. I'll have pictures of the cards of the year, some journaling prompts, a tarot layout to work with. And so I'm also working up to my 100th episode. Can you freaking believe that? I started this podcast in 2020 during COVID when I wasn't working. I was working. I was working online for Hibiscus Moon Crystal Academy, but my business essentially shut down. I was doing all in-person stuff. So that's how I really transitioned into, more online stuff. But I, would really love your insights about this podcast, like what you want more of, what you want less of. What else do you want to hear? Do you have any questions you want to ask? I love doing Q&A episodes. Just send it to me at Angie@themoonandstone.com, and any other insights. I think I might pull together some old guests and just talk about things, maybe put together like some things I really liked over the years. But we'll see. It's about like my balancing my work with that. But I do love to do this podcast. So until next time.
Thanks for listening to Centered with me, Angie Yingst. If you'd like to send me a question or comment about this show or any shows, you can send them to Angie@themoonandstone.com.